shop in the
There's a
back.
detail and you get at the time of Great Depression.
Change all the windows
Give them a
out.
lot more information, but now kind of being able to, once it got the framework
We had a good,
and,
we've had luck with
I
contractors.
consider you the key stuff, but then
Always.
the other stuff falls into place.
Prices were right.
Or if I give them an assignment where they have to find the information on their own, they're gonna be able to pull that off and they'll learn more from that, and listen to me say.
But how little content can you give them and have them still be equally successful?
Oh, well,
You know,
I'm not saying throw out the content.
Yeah.
How seriously do you take that 5.5 additional hours each day? That
Oh,
we
outside
should
class.
be assigning?
Maybe you shouldn't take the
It's pretty
decision.
close with the reading.
Yeah, I don't dislike papers necessarily.
I'm not convinced that they spend that.
I've known.
Right, but you take that into consideration.
And.
20, 10, 5-acre.
Yeah.
And that was
Mini ranch,
Little-
mini ranchos, I call
Yeah.
it.
Megan Kelly.
They ruined that
The
country.
skills
And
classes. is
then
that-
they got this
Of
land,
course,
they
we
didn't
should
want to
write
do with
it,
it.
but then,
Well,
when
exactly.
they disengage,
So
they're
where,
not,
where?
yeah, they're not going and spitting out
Up
5
at, one of
hours.
my mining engineers, so I was working up in Motherlode country.
So were you up in
I
like
guess they can be old in their
Placerville
saddles.
area?
Placerville, we were south of there, but Placerville was part of my territory. I worked
Yeah, this is an
Sierra.
interesting.
Uh-huh.
It's
Sierra County, Placer County, Eldorado County,
Uh-huh.
Everett County,
But I appreciate your.
Calaveras County, Wallaby, and Mercer.
Yeah.
You're
Uh-huh.
2 weeks away,
Ah.
right?
It's a little more than that, but much.
Yeah, I know it's.
You know where that is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think this could be any order. I got it.
Well, that.
I'm good.
This might be the last.
Exactly.
Well, they're all gonna do
Exactly,
it.
so she moved,
Oh.
charities.
We took all the bad habits.
Who's introducing you?
Yes, yes, so they left
I don't
there.
know. There's no one.
We're about to-
You're the only
Um,
member of
they're
the environmental science
Yeah, my daughter lives
department.
in Idaho Falls.
Oh, does she?
Is it your department that hosts this?
Yeah, there.
Yes.
No one came,
Wow.
no one came from the department when Rob did his talk. So he introduced
I was
himself.
following live on,
Yeah, we already heard it introduced.
See what the man has to say here.
Now I know how, marginal comedians and bands and feel they perform in front
Let's
of.
just hope you don't get any hecklers.
Yes, exactly.
Are you prepared? Have you got some zingers to shoot back?
I can pull something out of the hat if necessary. These are what you call jokes. Old Rodney Dangerfield. Pull some Rodney Dangerfield out.
should we get you a tie that we can kind of very loosely put around your neck?
Politically incorrect, but still funny. Wow.
How you doing, John? Good. No, thank you. Yeah.
Oh, well.
You know, I wonder how they do the formula here. The last lecture I went to was Dr.
Rob Thomas.
And that was a 5-pizza lecture. So how do they figure out how many they're gonna need?
There are 5 people only for
Five, no, there are 5 pizzas.
Oh, 5 pizzas.
So you're a 3-pizza lecture.
Oh, man, oh, man. Tom, thank you for taking pity on me and showing up. Ah, well. I'm sure Sinatra, when he started out, he played at small venues, a handful of audience members.
Well, for years, there was 0 pizzas provided, so, step up. Potato donuts. I don't even remember the donuts. Yeah.
You're gonna do the introduction?
I guess so. I'm trying to look up where Bill got his PhD.
Yeah. They'll be back.
Did they ever say what kind of visit?
It's a very short visit, yeah.
Would they come down for answers?
You know, I don't, did they tell you?
What? Oh, I miss him again.
Well, I'm supposed to do a lecture maybe next year on tailings disposal. We'll see how many pizzas I get off of that.
Yeah, I hope you get a better audience.
All I care about is how many pizzas I get. That's all I care about.
My class was larger this morning. So.
Snow day.
Yeah, I had 20 people out of 21 show up today.
Well, Dr. Thomas was commenting on his, and almost all his class was off somewhere else for his lecture.
Thomas,
So don't think-
long-winded, never stops talking.
Oh, hey, Rob.
How are you? I'm sorry for inviting you almost right now, to be quite honest. I wish there were more people, but oh well. I have to stop the Rodney Dangerfield. It's serious. Okay. Professional. I don't know, when should I start here? Neil, you are the representative. from the
Well, I
North
guess that
side.
I.
It's 4:02,
Yeah.
maybe we should wait, what, another 3 minutes? 5 minutes? 5-minute rule?
Oh, I don't know. They've had time.
They've had plenty of time.
Yeah, I'll just
Oh,
introduce you really
they're
slowly.
coming, they're coming.
Oh, here we go.
Thank you for coming.
You know, maybe there's this young fellow on the poster is giving a talk in a different room. It's, I don't know if that really. Good update.
Someone with your hair should not speak about
Yeah.
appearances. You know what Gloria says to me in the morning? You look like Neil Foley. You gotta comb your hair. It's the mad scientist look. I know.
Anyways, this is
Shut up,
actually,
punk.
you thought you were coming for an academic talk. Instead, we're doing a little back and forth. See how else comes in. Well, should I introduce you? To anyone who does not know Bill, this is Bill Janus, who has been here since 95, right after your PhD?
Yes, 1995.
Yeah, got his PhD in modern German history
Modern German history.
from
Yes.
University of Buffalo. I've recently read off the flyer.
Thank you for
And-
doing that.
Where'd you get your undergraduate degree?
University of Buffalo,
Oh.
SUNY all the way through.
All right. Any
So you
postdoc in between there and here, or
Pardon?
any postdoc in between there and here, or straight
Oh,
to here?
no, straight here. Well, I taught at a couple SUNY schools before I came here. So adjunct, SUNY Fredonia primarily.
Well, Bill Janus is giving probably our most historically minded talk. So,
All right,
thank you.
great. Hey, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. I appreciate you coming today. I also want to thank what remains of the environmental science department here for inviting me. Sincere thank you, actually. And I apologize. I was going to do this extemporaneously, but it's just too much material. And I knew I wasn't going to really be able to pull it off as well as I'd like to. So I'm going to read a paper, but I have slides to go along with my paper. So I do want to apologize a little bit for that. So we are in the midst of the 6th Great Extinction. It epitomizes our current geological era, the Anthropocene. As biodiversity rapidly disappears, between 150 and 200 plant and animal species vanish each and every day. There are very few wild places left on this planet. The air we breathe, the water we drink are contaminated with carcinogens. Even the South Pole and the summit of Mount Everest are polluted by microplastics. And of course, our climate is rapidly breaking down. It is possible that in a brief span of just 2 generations, human civilization, as we know it, will cease to exist. How did we get here? Why did our historical path lead us to the brink of planetary destruction? Obviously, there are a multitude of reasons that offer explanations to these existential questions. Examining the history of energy in the United States can perhaps be the best and most insightful way of understanding our global predicament. Of course, a historian is going to say that, okay? And most critically, give us the wisdom we so desperately need to avoid ecocide. Now, there are five, what I identified as five general characteristics, or I call iron laws, that seem to guide the history of energy in the US, and in the broader sense, the recent history of energy worldwide. One is that modern civilization is defined by a quest for controlling greater stores and flows of more concentrated and more versatile forms of energy. We have progressed, quote unquote, at least how the West defines progress, from a low energy civilization to an ever greater high energy civilization. A second iron law is that energy development seems to follow Jevons paradox, observed by the English economist Stanley Jevons. Increased efficiencies in utilizing energy sources always lead to increased energy consumption, rather than an expected decrease in energy consumption. I would add that likewise, greater supplies of energy resources never satisfy energy needs. Instead, they spur a demand for even more energy, whether through greater efficiencies, more supply, or a combination of both. We never achieve energy abundance, and we perpetually experience energy scarcity because efficiency and supply breakthroughs simply appear to drive up demand for energy. And so if you can see the slide here, just as an example, when people drove automobiles that got them 15 miles per gallon on average, they drove very little, all right? It was expensive to drive. But the paradox is when gas efficiency and those automobiles became more and more efficient and got them 40 miles per gallon, they drove a hell of a lot more. And not only did they drive a hell of a lot more, they ironically used even more gasoline than they did when they drove automobiles at 15 miles. They got them 15 miles an hour. The same thing is if the supply goes up, gas prices go down, people drive more and more and more. You need more and more and more energy as in response to that, okay? Now, Jevons paradox seems to be baked into modern neoliberal capitalism, explaining one of the reasons why this economic system is marked by energy scarcity. And that's the key, that's a key term, energy scarcity. We constantly don't have enough energy, even as our culture and our civilization taps into more and more and more and more energy. It is driven by a constant energy-intensive economic growth and expansion. It is one of the reasons why we now live in a high-energy civilization. Most ominously, Jevons paradox seriously undermines the many utopian environmental promises of, quote, clean and renewable energy technology and sources. Replacing fossil fuels with renewables will probably never end our planet's ecological crisis because there is no such thing as environmentally neutral or benign energy, especially if that energy infrastructure will infinitely expand. High energy civilizations cannot be reconciled with having healthy and vibrant ecosystems. Now, I'm not making a simple reductionist argument here. It doesn't have to be this way, okay? If we choose not to use energy in the way we have been using it. But high energy advocates are making such a crude reductionist argument, okay? having a high energy civilization is somehow equated with advancement and progress, and a low energy civilization is associated with backwardness and poverty. That's not true. Examples: ancient Egypt was a low energy society, extremely advanced, complex society. Costa Rica, low energy society. People there have these happy indexes are off the charts for persons who live in Costa Rica. High energy civilization, Russia. Not complex. It's an authoritarian society. Saudi Arabia, high energy civilization and culture. I wouldn't want to live in Saudi Arabia. Okay. Now, the third iron law of energy is that we never abandon prime mover power sources. Intense exploitation of human labor, the most ancient of prime movers, is still ubiquitous. Even egregious forms like child labor continue to exist, and slave labor. Human labor is the foundation of China's economy. US agriculture employed animals well into the 1960s. Okay. Now I know you're thinking, aha, gotcha, Janus. We don't use animals any longer in the United States. Wrong. The honeybee. The United States Department of Agriculture keeps statistics on a number of honeybees that are pollinators, are chief pollinators in the United States and around the world. There's 2.88 million honeybee colonies. All right. That tiny little animal, the bee, we need its work. We need its energy, okay, to keep this civilization going the way we know it. Okay. So next, keep going with. I apologize. With we never get rid of prime movers. Wood, or traditional biofuels, wood and charcoal. We use more wood today than we have ever used to generate energy. Entire forests, the boreal forests in Canada, are being swept away and cut down to generate clean energy, especially in Europe. That's how they get their electricity and get to net zero and other schemes like that. Now there's a third law, all right, and is that we never abandon prime mover power sources. Okay, I said that already. Sorry. This beautiful fact about not getting rid of power sources suggests that the so-called Great Transition, and that's a term historians use, when Western civilization transitioned to fossil fuels, all right, it's really more of a great addition, okay? Transition suggests that earlier prime mover energy sources became redundant and that they somehow were fully replaced by fossil fuels. Again, this is simply not true. As I said, I think I came up with this. I think it should be called the Great Addition. The Great Transition's deceptive imprecision tragically plagues energy discourse to this day, to the detriment of our planet's climate. I've yet to read a single renewable energy advocate even acknowledge the possibility that the current transition to green power may not end the era of fossil fuels in any way. It too may be just another great addition to a long list of never abandoned prime movers, all necessary in order to power our high energy civilization. Okay, now to the next iron law. Energy's fourth iron law appears to suggest that modern prime mover additions consistently take at least 3 generations for a given prime mover to be fully integrated into powering our civilization. It took coal 60 years to peak as the global prime mover For petroleum, it was 55 years. For natural gas, 55 years. I apologize for this clumsy graph. Historian, I didn't know how to figure, I wasted hours on this trying to figure out how to do a graph. This was the best I could do. Where was I here? This is another warring omen, I would say, for those who hope that renewables will fully replace fossil fuels in a decade or less. Coal, petroleum, and natural gas development never faced rabid and organized cultural and political resistance. The public, entrepreneurs, and government practically fell over themselves to develop and adopt fossil fuels as the prime mover of civilization. But it still took 145 years for fossil fuels to collectively power our society. History strongly suggests that if one believes that the cultural and political football, that is renewable energy, will fully replace fossil fuels in a decade or two, as promised by many, then they're also likely to believe in the existence of unicorns. Last iron law. Only one word is needed to summarize the final iron law of energy, electricity. This is the most efficient, versatile, and convenient form of motive energy on our planet. It powers our modern high-energy civilization. Every developing nation aspires to be electrified. Historically, the electrification of cities and towns has always symbolized human progress. A wide range of prime movers, from fossil to nuclear to renewables, generated. Electricity powers almost every product and gadget that human ingenuity has invented. Okay? In our high energy society, it is impossible to imagine life without many of these products. Conveniently, and this is just came out this month in Energy, the journal Energy, conveniently a visual representation of electricity's history nicely illustrates all five energy's iron laws. It's only since 1950 that the generation of electricity has skyrocketed, okay? As it's become more and more efficient. So it's exploded at nearly an arithmetic rate. Additionally, any prime mover used to generate electricity has also never been abandoned. And now here's something, and another blow to the many hopes invested in renewables. As a percentage, in 1900, more energy was generated by renewables than today. Turning now to the history of energy in the US. So those are the basics of energy. In particular, to how energy development has impacted our environment. We can say that this history can be broken down into four eras. Beginning with the founding of the Republic, the first era can accurately be described as having a pro-exploitive energy outlook toward the environment. I didn't make this up. This isn't mine. This is from a historian I read. Lasting until approximately the 1890s, the American public and its government paid little to no heed as to how the exploitation of prime mover energy sources impacted its virgin and resource-rich environment. Forests were cleared, species went extinct, rivers were dammed willy-nilly, mines destroyed hollows, and wilderness was lost forever. Energy development was unregulated and irrational, and Americans came to take for granted, and they expected, access to a limitless supply of low-cost energy. This cheap and easy energy bonanza was the engine that forged the American empire, and its legacy still reverberates to this day. Today, almost all Americans expect the energy they use to be inexpensive and unlimited. It is our national birthright. It's also one of the reasons why even questioning the morality of having a high energy civilization is taboo in a lot of ways in the United States. I'm gonna get a drink of water here. We'll jump now to the next energy era, which stretches from 1890s to the 1960s. The era with a wise use energy outlook toward the environment. Beginning with the progressive movement, progressives sought to rationalize and democratize America's exploitation of its rich energy resources by intelligently planning and regulating what we can call by 1890 the energy sector of the US economy. Government could curb its worst excesses for the benefit of all American citizens. But what must be stressed here is that while many of these reforms, such as state public service commissions and rural co-ops and municipal utilities and early pollution mitigation laws, may have had a positive impact on the environment, such outcomes were often accidental and unintended. The focus of these reforms was always on improving the material wealth, health, and well-being of Americans. But for sake of brevity, and I'm already going too slow, for sake of brevity, I must jump to the 1930s and the history of the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, and the politics of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The 1930s were a decade of two catastrophes, one economic, the other environmental. While the Depression wreaked havoc on the entire country, the Dust Bowl ravaged the southern plains, destroying farms and entire ecosystems. The Roosevelt administration's approach to both problems was to find a rational technical solution, the New Deal Dam. In particular, the Bonneville and Great Coulee dams and the dams of the Tennessee Valley Authority. These dams perfectly embody the wise look outlook. Their primary task was to provide jobs, electrify the countryside, grow the economy, prevent floods, and modernize the nation. The dams had a secondary task as well, because irrigation was now possible. Dams, along with better agricultural practices, would end the Dust Bowl, and it was hoped heal environmentally damaged land. Now, we know that these dams, in fact, devastated freshwater ecosystems, but to wise use New Dealers, this was of little concern. New Deal dams accomplished their key economic, cultural, and political tasks. Now, I believe that the legacy of wise use New Deal policies has left a lasting stamp on much of today's energy discourse, especially in the manner that renewable energy sources, solar and wind in particular, are characterized by their advocates. The chief focus of today's Democratic Party's Green New Deal is on creating jobs and spurring economic growth. The rhetoric promoting the plan clearly sees mitigating carbon emissions as an ancillary goal. Just like with New Deal dams, it's through healing technologies that our civilization will establish a rapprochement with nature. Unfortunately, renewable activists refuse to even consider the moral and ideological critiques of promoting a high-energy civilization. As we have seen, alleged great transitions may really only be great additions, and at least acknowledging the fundamental incompatibility between a high-energy civilization and the natural world is important in these ecologically perilous times. So can we find anything environmentally redeeming in Roosevelt's dam building policy? I think we can, yes. Roosevelt was a shrewd and practical politician, but he was also an idealist. And unlike today, where our high-energy civilization is uncritically geared to power crass materialism and conspicuous consumption, the power generated by New Deal dams had a higher and more principled function to fulfill. The dams would break Jevons paradox. Energy abundance would be achieved and the subsequent wealth and affluence that would follow would be used to promote democracy and what the ancient Greeks called the good life. Now, here's a quote from 1932, Life magazine, I think really nicely captures what Roosevelt is trying to do with these dams and all this energy that's being generated by these dams. President Roosevelt's long-cherished vision is of a whole new US society based on power, for when drudgery relieving power is almost as cheap and abundant as sunlight, he believes free citizens will have leisure and dignity enough to make democracy really work. Now, this high-minded idealism would broaden in the 1960s, evolving into the energy environment balance outlook era, lasting for a brief and spectacular, I think, 2 decades. The American public and its leaders, for the first time in US history, actually sought to protect and promote the nation's environmental integrity, even at the expense of sacrificing energy development. But as I outline this history, one must be aware that a growing underlying tension was also co-evolving in American culture at this time. America was becoming a consumer society. Mass consumption is deeply divergent, again, from environmentally friendly agenda. An environmentally incompatible high-energy infrastructure is necessary to power such a consumption-driven lifestyle. Rather than dreaming of an America, I sound like a politician here, America, where energy abundance would establish an erudite, moral, civic-minded, slow-living society and culture, which I think FDR did. President John F. Kennedy now argued that citizens needed air conditioning units and televisions. And here's a quote from Kennedy opening up Hanford's Federal Atomic Reservation, not too far from us, all right, back in 1963. We need the equivalent of a new Grand Coulee Dam every 60 days. Each new generation deserves a higher standard of living. We don't realize that what we regarded as affluence 30 years ago is now way down below. Air conditioning, television, electricity, and the rest have changed the life of this country, and we are going to find the same extraordinary changes in the next 20 or 30 years. So perpetual, ever-expanding need for more and more and more and more energy so we can buy stuff. Still, I'm going to be optimistic about this era. Still, it is the birth and growth of environmentalism that makes the energy environmental balance outlook era unique in America's energy history. Rebelling against the mentality of their parents, many in the baby boomer generation first became civically active in the civil rights and peace movements. Soon, many also became opponents of our modern high-energy civilization and the damage it brought to our planet. They were inspired to a life of environmental activism by empathy. The songs of humpback whales that were recorded by Scott McVeigh and Roger Payne cannot be underestimated on what an impact they had on American culture. 10.5 million pressings of this album went out alone in National Geographic magazine in one of its editions. It inspired movies, plays, novels, children's books, and other music to this very day. Also, they were inspired by ecological outrage. Americans at that time seemed to be outraged by ecological disasters. And one of the biggest was the Santa Barbara oil spill. I remember this as a kid, actually, kind of a vague memory. People really, and today it's sort of blasé, another oil spill, whoop-de-doo. But in 1969, this really riveted the nation. In fact, it started the first Earth Day. It's going to be coming up this Saturday. So they were inspired by this, also the Cuyahoga oil, the river fire outside of Cleveland was something that a lot of people still remember to this day. It's kind of iconic moment in American history of the horrible terror we've subjected nature to. People remember this, who lived through this and experienced this. So, demanding an end to environmental degradation, a new environmental movement arose that was politically formidable. That first Earth Day, 20 million Americans marched around the country, all around the country. That's a huge number of Americans protesting. Protests that we have today don't come anywhere near that kind of mobilization in American society. This era's environmentalism did not have a boutique quality. A broad segment of the population actively and consistently supported its goals, and it had a deeply analytical and intellectual foundation to it. Where was I here? Analytical foundation to it, especially had important popular thinkers who pointed out the incompatibility between having an ever-growing high-energy civilization and preserving biodiversity and ecological well-being. You have intellectuals like Wendell Berry here, basically criticizing we don't have to have this kind of crude reductionism and that you see in Jevon's paradox. There's a way out of this. There is a way out of it, it's asking moral questions about how we are using energy. You've got a person here like Kenneth E. Boulding, who wrote a very important and influential essay in 1966, Economics of the Coming Spaceship Earth, where I think he's just pointing out something that makes this common sense, right? It's only a madman or an economist would believe that you can have exponential growth powered by energy development. It keeps getting greater and greater in a world that's finite. You're either a madman or an economist. And finally, someone who's really been forgotten, E.F. Schumacher. Anyone's ever heard of him? One person has. He wrote a very influential book in 1973 called Small is Beautiful. So this is really, really important. The good life was not found living in an endlessly expanding, soul-deadening, high-energy, consumption-driven material cycle of scarcity. Okay. Now, I want to emphasize something about these thinkers. All right. These critics of our modern high-energy society were not ascetics. All right. They did not promote a monkish life of self-denial, poverty, and sacrifice. As critics, to this day, I think dishonestly caricature them doing, and people who question a high-energy civilization. All right? Instead, they merely redefined our culture's definition of abundance, chasing to possess more and more air conditioning units and televisions was poverty. Having clean air and water in a world filled with healthy flora and fauna was wealth. So environmental victories soon followed in the wake of political protests, and a series of substantive and monumental laws were passed that prioritized environment over energy development. And the two most important ones were the passing of the establishment of the Environmental Protection Agency and the Endangered Species Act. And I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but they definitely did at least restrict puts energy development. Okay. Yet the greatest obstacle, and also I want you to keep in mind during this whole time that underlying tension, okay, that existed, America becoming more and more of a consumption-based society. Yet the greatest obstacle to continuing flowering of the environmental movement was the energy crisis of the 1970s. Now, in popular memory, the energy crisis, highlighted by gas shortages and high energy prices, is associated with one event, okay, the Arab oil embargo. But actually, it was a series of 4 events. US hit peak oil in 1970. Production went down. And it wouldn't go up until, I believe, 1993 because of fracking, the development of fracking. But from 70, it's going down in the United States, causing an energy crisis. OPEC started raising prices in 1973, threefold. And then the Arab nations that were members of OPEC put an embargo on the sale of oil because of Israeli-Arab wars and relations. And then finally, the Iranian Revolution in 1979 cut production for the world market by 10%. Okay? Suddenly, America's long history of easy access to unlimited amounts of cheap energy was broken. It was an enormous blow to the country's ego and psyche. A crucial characteristic of American exceptionalism was shattered, and I believe it is the reason why the nation's environmental movement became a stillborn revolution. Popular shock, disbelief, and an ensuing panic robbed the growing critique of our high-energy civilization the time and space it needed to become a true mass movement. Americans were abruptly left with an unfortunate and stark choice to make as to how to confront the energy crisis. Either embark on an all-out energy development drive or adopt a lifestyle focused on energy conservation. Ultimately, the former course was chosen, and with it, the energy environmental balance outlook era died. Now, before we go on to the next era, there was various ways of kind of confronting this problem. They formed the kind of maybe having a command economy by forming the Department of Energy. Taxes is actually the best way to deal with trying to conserve energy, but Americans don't want that. The last time taxes on fuel, federal taxes went up was in 1993 to 18.4 cents a gallon, and since then, they have not gone up, and I can't see them going up in the future because Democrats and Republicans take pledges on not raising these taxes. Fines, fees, and mandates. Nixon's Project Independence, 1980. This actually worked. That's one of the elements of this was the federal speed limit on interstates was lowered to 55 miles an hour. Americans were willing to make that sacrifice in the 1970s. Forget about it. That's never going to happen again. Our society has changed. Our culture has changed. Never. I mean, people get all upset about, they're going to take their gas stoves from their kitchens and they're about to charge and burn down the Capitol building over something like that. This cafe fuel efficiency standards, I think I already talked about that. Just because the standards go up, that actually doesn't mean anything. In some ways, it drives up consumption of gasoline when the fleet of automobiles, the average miles per gallon goes up. We end up using more and more gas in the end anyways, petroleum. All right, so President's Congress, I already read that. Okay, so eventually boosting energy supplies was the strategy that was most successful in tackling the energy crisis. Richard Nixon's decision to both open up Alaska's North Slope to oil and gas drilling and build the Trans-Alaska Pipeline is a major and significant bellwether in the history of energy in the US. Okay. Anyone can tell me why there's snow here and there's no snow on either side of that pipeline in Alaska?
Are they refrigerating the ground?
Yes, they're refrigerating the ground because this is permafrost that's melting because of climate change. And the only way to keep oil being pumped from the North Slope down to port facilities down in the southern part of Alaska is by refrigerating the permafrost to keep it from melting. Okay, yeah, that's a great photo. Okay, yeah.
How the hell do they do that?
I don't know. But they do it. I'm sorry I have to keep going.
There's refrigeration towers on every single tower that supports the pipe, and it's run by solar.
Well, okay, cool. All right. I'm happy at least that it's run by solar. Thank God. Okay. America's public lands, from this point forward, America's public lands and waters would consistently be opened over and over again to energy development whenever there was a fear that our high energy civilization was in danger. In some ways, America's energy history returned to its roots, the pro-exploitive energy outlook. Now, the opponents of environmentalism triumphed because the energy crisis, they could more convincingly caricature critics of high energy civilization as fanatical ascetic freaks who wanted to take America back to the Stone Age. Like Ronald Reagan's Secretary of Interior, who in the 1970s says, the new environmental movement is on a collision course with the growing demand for energy. Fall in the hands of a small, arrogant faction, which has dedicated itself to bringing our society to a halt. They are the anti-producers, the anti-achievers. The doctrine they preach is that of scarcity and self-denial. I'm not going to continue on with that quote. You get the gist there. The final nail in the coffin for those who wanted to mount a reasoned and deeply critical and philosophical examination of America's high energy civilization came with the debacle of a speech delivered to the nation by President Jimmy Carter on the 15th of July, 1979. In the speech, known as the Crisis of Confidence speech, or the Malaise speech, Carter blamed America's increasingly meaningless pursuit of things for much of the nation's woes, from causing a breakdown in civic engagement to triggering moral and existential angst. Implicitly, this was a critique of America's never satisfied addiction to energy. I'm going to try to play this. It's only about 2.5 minutes. It's a clip from C-SPAN that I did, and C-SPAN wouldn't let me embed it. So I hope I can do this.
And shapers of our democracy. As a people, we know our past, and we are proud of it. Our progress has been part of the living history of America, even the world. We always believed that we were part of a great movement of humanity itself called democracy, involved in the search for freedom. And that belief has always strengthened us in our purpose. But just as we're losing our confidence in the future, we're also beginning to close the door on our past. In a nation that was proud of hard work, strong families, close-knit communities, and our faith in God, too many of us now tend to worship self-indulgence and consumption. Human identity is no longer defined by what one does, but by what one owns. But we've discovered that owning things and consuming things does not satisfy our longing for meaning. We've learned that piling up material goods cannot fill the emptiness of lives which have no confidence or purpose. The symptoms of this crisis of the American spirit are all around us. For the first time in the history of our country, a majority of our people believe that the next 5 years will be worse than the past 5 years. 2/3 of our people do not even vote. The productivity of American workers is actually dropping. And the willingness of Americans to save for the future has fallen below that of all other people in the Western world. As you know, there is a growing disrespect for government and for churches and for schools, the news media, and other institutions. This is not a message of happiness or reassurance.
Stop there. I can't even imagine an American president saying,
Well, wait a minute.
giving that speech today. It's impossible for me to imagine.
In
that.
context,
I have to keep going. I have to keep going. I'm
engineers
sorry.
make terrible politicians. Hoover is another example.
Okay, so today, as Carter is praised for being an honorable and principled head of state, one can forget how as president he was pilloried as a feckless and weak moralizer. The media lambasted Carter's speech and he became a national figure of ridicule. In the aftermath of the speech, America's politicians learned their lesson well. One never asks Americans to examine their moral character. One never asks them to make sacrifices. And one never questions our absolute right to possess unlimited amounts of junk. The stage was set for Carter to be sent to the dustbin of history. And we elected one of our most popular leaders, the Kipper, President Ronald Reagan. His ascent to power marks the start of our final and current energy era, the market triumphalist outlook era. Reagan's election was a transformational moment in time. Unfettered and unregulated capitalism was idealized, and the commons and government were demonized. America went, this is key, from having a free market economy to being a free market society. All facets of life were monetized. All human interactions were transactional. Only market incentives and solutions could solve problems and achieve policy objectives. Irresistible and perpetual economic growth became our religion. Wall Street's bulls were let loose. The economy was deregulated, reestablishing America's heritage of enjoying unlimited access of cheap and plentiful energy was necessary to power this perpetual growth. Any and all environmental concerns really were dismissed. Federal lands were open to fossil fuel exploitation at unprecedented levels. Regulation of the energy sector was either completely eliminated or severely restricted. And beating back or ignoring existing environmental legislation was paramount. These attitudes permeated all of America. This is my argument here. From the federal level to the state level, and from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party, America became a market society. Now, the following slides, and I'm almost finished. Sorry, folks. The following slides may not be too popular with some in my audience, but the presidency of Barack Obama clearly demonstrates how the market triumphalist outlook defined his administration's energy policies. Environmental concerns, much less existential anxieties about promoting a high energy civilization, were non-existent. Okay? The Deepwater Horizon oil spill is an example of that. Nothing happened to the oil companies or the energy sector at all as a result of that. And then we have here Obama yucking it up in Texas in 2016 about him overseeing the greatest expansion of drilling for oil and gas in US history. This is Fox News was very upset with this. They claimed that he didn't deserve the credit. But according to Obama, he deserves the credit.
Now, I know we're an oil country, and we need American energy, and by the way, American energy production. It went up every year I was president. And, you know, that whole suddenly America's like the biggest oil producer, the biggest guy. That was me, people. I just wanted to.
Yes, it was.
Wow, there he is in Houston yesterday taking full credit.
Yes, he gets full credit for it, all right.
Credit for the booming.
All right, escape. All right, cool. President Joe Biden's policies are no better. Now I'm really putting the Democrats here, putting the pressure on them. They're supposed to be actually opposition to market triumphalism, at least traditionally they were. A healthy democracy has opposition parties. We don't seem to have that. And that puts our democracy's health, I think, into question. But Joe Biden's policies are no better. He too is a market triumphalist. I read these actually. Inflation Reduction Act, the Investment in Jobs Act. Okay, I read these over. There's no money here being put for environmental kind of concerns. The balanced outlook is gone. All right, in this legislation. This at best is a regression to the FDR era of wise use outlook, but without Roosevelt's civic and democratic idealism. It's all about priming the pump of neoliberalism. And if you don't believe me, further, Biden allowing just a couple months ago oil drilling in Alaska's North Slope, the so-called Willow Project. A couple weeks ago, he opened up the Gulf of Mexico to oil drilling. Size of the state of Florida was opened up to be leased for oil and gas exploitation. And I can't keep up. Again, I can't keep up with this guy. I had to put this slide in 2 days ago because Alaska, he's announced a new policy of opening up and exploiting natural gas in Alaska that's going to require another trans-Alaska pipeline to be built, bringing gas down to southern Alaska where it'll be liquefied and then exported around the world. Okay. Before moving to conclusion, there's one more. Okay, one more slide here of Joe. For Biden administration, renewables are an important addition to the country's high energy civilization infrastructure, all right? But it's an addition to what exists. And this attitude is best symbolized at a recent electric vehicle photo op where Joe Biden burned rubber. You can see it on C-SPAN. He's driving around, going from 0 to 80 in 2 seconds. A huge Hummer EV, all right? FDR's idealism, it's not here. Definitely not Carter's idealism is all gone. So before moving to conclusions, I must say just a few words about renewable energy, in particular solar energy. Its original proponents, going back to the 60s and 70s, envisioned solar as a prime mover that would democratize American society and break neoliberalism and its ever high energy cycle of scarcity. Right? Sun and the wind, they're free. All right? They're egalitarian. Nobody owns the sun, or nobody should own the sun. A market society, the sun actually becomes property, as Idealism was infectious, and it fired the imagination of many Americans. And these are just 3 books. This book is in the stacks at the UN library. I think it's proof that that alone, I was shocked to see it was there. But then, I'm doing some research. I found out that a lot of people read Lavin's Soft Energy Paths, all right? Rather than fearing an inevitable corporate, high-tech, high-energy, environmentally devastated Blade Runner future, Solar allowed many to visualize a future of civic-minded citizens living the good life and living small and autonomously, powered by simple, privately owned backyard solar panels. Well, but instead, what we have, okay, is in our market triumphalist era, that's not true. Renewables destroy environments now because they're corporate, especially if they are corporate, market-oriented, geared to power an ever-expanding high-energy civilization. Okay, renewable energy depends on the exploitation of humans, corporate renewables, the obliteration of species and ecosystems, and its most vociferous partisans hide this fact by redefining the meaning of environmentalism. Here's the Economist, this month's Economist. That's the new environmentalism, okay? Land that's sterile and dead, filled with power lines. Many in the renewable community, the corporate renewable community, they rail like the biggest, most hardcore neoliberal Republican about regulations, all right, that stop the development of renewable energy. They call for a deregulatory agenda. This is from a group called the Breakthrough Institute, which is sort of in the forefront of pushing corporate renewable energy. A deregulatory agenda. So let's keep going here. I'm kind of jumping forward here, and I apologize. Hopefully I'll get this 2 pages down, almost. Our major media outlets have accepted this redefinition of environmentalists. And I'm going to talk about Michael E. Mann here. Who's ever heard of him? No one? This guy's huge. He's this bigwig climate scientist. He's all over the news. He's on CNN. He has a regular column in Time magazine. He hangs out with Al Gore and Hollywood bigwigs like DiCaprio and George Clooney. I read his book called The New Climate Wars. Makes a straw man argument in his book. Anyone who focuses on a critique of a high energy civilization, and he claims to be an environmentalist, by the way. And a lot of media identifies him as an environmentalist. He is the picture of environmentalist movement today for a lot of Americans. And so he says anyone who critiques a high energy civilization, all right, is someone who wants us to live off the grid vegan hermits. Okay, he's channeling Hodel, Reagan Interior Secretary there. Anyone who even dares to criticize a market-oriented society and claims that it's at odds with basic human rights and environmental sustainability, he just dismisses them and calls it an old chestnut argument. I don't understand. Well, I know what that means, old chestnut. It's not even worth even discussing, okay? And he doesn't. He blasts environmentalists as being parochial. He says that because of environmentalists, old style environment, because he's the new style environmentalist, right? But because of these old style environmentalists, people like George Shultz, who was a Bechtel executive and the Secretary of State under Ronald Reagan, and Hank Paulson, who was CEO of Goldman Sachs, okay, and Treasury Secretary under the second Bush, who did the whole bank bailout in 2008, they calls them that they are passionate about climate action. And the trouble lies with, the bleeding hearts, what he calls the people who cry crocodile tears about environmental degradation. I mean, this guy really is. He is the picture of environmentalism today for a lot of people. I'm kind of surprised that no one's heard of him. But then again, I kind of dig around in this stuff, so maybe I shouldn't be surprised. So conclusions. Sorry, I was hoping to get this done 10 minutes ago. Our world, is dying. Here's, what we're on, the path we're on isn't working, right? This is the CO2 levels in the atmosphere. They keep going up and up and up. We've got annual CO2 emissions. They keep going up and up and up and up. China, every one of these dots is a massive, massive coal-powered power plant being built or being planned to be built. Now, I know the renewable folks, they keep trotting out all the solar and renewable projects in China. But hey, it's that iron law. It's the great addition. It's not the transition. It's the great addition. Same thing for India, by the way. The amount of wildlife across the entire globe plummeting at terrible rates. 60%, only 4% of animals are wild on this planet. The rest are either us or the animals we eat. When it comes to birds, only 30% of birds are wild. The rest are animals we eat. So things aren't working for us in this society when it comes to our environment. I think humanity must finally do what President Jimmy Carter asked that we do more than 40 years ago. We must ask deeply moral and existential questions about our culture, economy, and society. And here this is plagiarism on my part, I'll admit. I'm really influenced by Michael J. Sandel, who's a moral political philosopher out of Harvard. And I think his words are really important. Asking Americans to support endless energy expansion, even if renewables are the prime movers powering this expansion exclusively, all right, is not ennobling or courageous. I think it's in fact cowardly, all right? Aristotle taught that virtue is something we cultivate with practice. It atrophies with disuse. We become just by doing just acts, temperate by doing temperate acts, brave by doing brave acts. Rousseau held a similar view. The more a country asks of its citizens, the greater their devotion to it. Use it or lose it. As soon as a public service ceases to be the chief business of the citizens, and they would rather serve with their money than with their persons, the state is not far from its fall. Carter tried it. It didn't work. Now, not questioning the morality of market triumphalists is also cowardly. I'm going to say something here, Johnny, hope you don't take it personally, all right? But I was kind of cowardly at that last town hall. I didn't think it was my place really to say anything. But before I say that, let's just read this through. There is an unwillingness in the US to have a debate on what constitutes the good life. Deliberations on markets and civic values and morals touch unavoidably on competing conceptions of the good life. This is terrain on which we sometimes fear to tread. for fear of disagreement. We hesitate to bring our moral and spiritual convictions into the public square. By shrinking from these questions, but shrinking from these questions does not leave them undecided. It simply means that markets will decide them for us. This is the lesson of the last 4 decades. You know, the OCHI officials that came up there is all transactional, the degrees that we're offering. You know, students can find out how many hours they need to put in to get a degree and how much money they get out. That's no criticism of Western, actually, because my university, the University of Buffalo Alumni Magazine, I just got it a couple weeks ago, and what do they have in it? About the University of Buffalo being having an entrepreneurial culture. It's all about money, all about cash. Nothing more than that. So I was a coward. I'm guilty of that myself. I didn't say something when I probably should have. So terrible. Does this end like a Polish movie? My talk, the last 3 slides. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. I firmly, genuinely believe that there still is a way out of our environmental abyss. The stillborn environmental revolution of the 60s and 70s can be revived and made vital if we can discover and acknowledge the sacred that dwells in all living beings. Philosophy preached by the late Thich Nhat Hanh, then there is hope for our world. It's not all transactional. It's not all monetary, okay? If we can empathize with the lives of animals and the environment who we share our home with, recognize that they have cultures and stories filled with epic dramas of joy, sadness, defeat, and victory, as outlined in the books of ecologist Carl Safina, and there is hope for our world. Look, we're not a bunch of sociopaths, all right, the way I think Dr. Michael E. Mann says we are, cry crocodile tears because we see environmental disaster around us. I think human beings can be still moved by empathy, okay, by the world around them and the destruction that they see around them. And finally, last slide. And finally, I think we can break free of our high energy civilization's endless cycle of perpetual and artificial scarcity. It's artificial. Again, we don't have to follow Jivan's paradox, right? If we don't want to, we don't have to. It's not simple reductionism. By adopting an indigenous reciprocal gift culture that brings abundance, if we do that, I think we can break it. As taught by the botanist Robin Wall Kimmerer, then there is hope for our world. Possessing things is poverty. Living authentically in a vibrant ecosystem is wealth. Thank you. Sorry for taking so long. I know I've kept you guys, folks, so long. You don't have to ask questions if you don't want to. We can stop there. How about that? And, or I can answer questions. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I was going to say that this brings to mind ongoing debate between the computer hardware people and the computer software people. You ever get into that one?
No.
Computers had X amount of memory. Programmers could only use that amount. The hardware people figured out how to make the computer faster by adding more memory, so the software people responded by filling it up.
Jivan's paradox.
We have not stopped that yet.
Yes, that's Jivan's paradox. Yes.
So then you put Ann's theory about housework.
Yeah.
The more tools and appliances you have, you just create more work for yourself.
That's right.
Even though it's
Yep.
Well, thank you. Any criticisms actually would be welcome, because I'd like to actually get something published. And this is the first audience I've shared this with. And other than my own myself grilling myself and trying to pick apart weaknesses in my essay and my theories and my thesis and my history. Other than that, I haven't shared this with anyone, other than my wife. And so, and I appreciate folks can shoot me an email, letting me know if there's a flaw, and I'm sure there is. Flaws, plural, would be appreciated. Yes.
I guess I did wonder where nuclear power fits in, because when I was listening to this, I thought, why bother asking? It's a great, it's another addition.
You talk about nuclear being another great addition, yeah? Yeah. I mean, I studied the Petroleum Institute's webpage, and they're right. This is a petroleum-based society. The plastic that we use, the fertilizers that we use, not us gardeners, but, corporate farming, the green revolution, it all comes from natural gas and oil. It's not going away. And if, are we going to be a totalitarian society and say you cannot drill any more oil, you cannot drill any, drill for natural gas? I don't think so. I don't think so. People are going to still be drilling and using natural gas and oil. This table, it's full of carbon, fuels. So
Petroleum source.
yeah, petroleum source. Yep. Rob?
I'm just wondering in your, what you're going to publish or present ultimately, whether you're addressing the exponential growth curve of the human population. If we hit 12 billion by 2100, that seems to me to be overriding almost everything.
Yeah.
This population is going down so much in many countries.
It is, but the growth curve still is actually
going up.
Going down. The growth rate is going down, but it's going down on a very large number. And so I don't expect, we're at 8 billion and climbing. No population biologist or population person I know thinks that we will not consider to see, although a slowing growth for sure, a continued overall exponential growth rate going through to the end of the century.
I've seen many,
lessening of the rate.
But I've seen many renewable advocates, not all, but many, say that is a racist argument. They have this very utopian vision of the future. Total replacement